So, we have what looks like a big agenda today, but it being the last of the year and just shortly before the holidays and in the middle of other people's holidays, I'm going to be interested to see how many people. We have 12 people on the call.
Yeah, if it's anything like a lot of my colleagues, folks are already off, but we got a lot of cool stuff to talk about today.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that the gentleman Alexander Perlman from Capital One will show up because he was also asking for some time to talk about the Dask operator. So why don't we kick it off, Rob? You want to give an update on things going on in the operator framework, and we'll see if Joe Lanford shows up and can give us an operator SDK after that.
Sure, yeah, I'll combine I'm going to do the Operator Hub IO update as well as the framework update. We'll start with operatorhub.io. I'll share my screen and go through. I was just looking through some of the PRs since we last met, which was, I think, roughly a month ago. Ton of activity, so let me get my screen shared and I'll walk y'all through some of these. All right. What's interesting is if you look, I was just looking through 30 days ago, we're on page 4 here, which is pretty awesome. So that means we've got, I think there are 25 per page, so that's like 100-ish PRs, and you can see it's a bunch of folks updating versions and changing channels and things like that and adding new operators. So I picked a few of these that I thought were interesting. First one to note is when we're testing operators now, we've bumped the version of the operator lifecycle manager to 0.13 from 0.10. So this is the PR that merged that did that. So in the testing operators doc, you'll see that. So some new capabilities come in there. Let's see, the next one is the container security operator. This is really cool. This is an operator, I don't think there's much detail in the actual PR, that integrates with the Claire security scanner. So if you install this on a cluster and then you'll get your containers scanned with Claire, which is an open source scanner. And so this looks at some of the different packages you have in the operator image or the operand images you have running, and then flags known vulnerabilities about them, which is pretty cool.
Rob,
Yes.
that one, what's the status of that one? Has it been vetted?
It looks like it's still open. It looks like there was a few comments. I don't know if I think it needs some review basically, added like an hour ago. So this thing just was opened, yeah, an hour ago, which is really cool. So that one, will be available to play with here pretty soon.
Yeah, perfect.
Another one, I flagged this one for the RAD Analytics. They're implementing sub resources, which is pretty cool. So here they're doing it in their CRD. You can see them adding a sub resource or status. This is a way to get a little bit more granular with your RBAC. If you wanted to grant one of your components, if you have a pretty complex distributed application, to only update the status, you can give it an RBAC that only says you can update status, but you can't update other fields on the CR, which I thought was kind of cool. So I just wanted to point that out, that folks are getting pretty complicated with this, which is awesome. If you've ever looked at Kubernetes RBAC for like a deployment and there's the scale sub-resource, same kind of thing. You might want to grant somebody access to scale a deployment, but not to modify its configuration, for example. That's also good for scoping down an RBAC for like an autoscaler, so that you don't have to grant it access to the whole thing. Let's see, next one. This fellow, Christopher, that kind of on an individual effort made the Amazon service operator, kind of the first version of that. His current code has been archived, but there is a newer, a more official one from Amazon that will get updated. So I just wanted to call that out, is doing like a graceful removal of that, and then we're going to get the new one added. Next up, big update to Crunchy's Postgres operator. I know Postgres is really popular, so they've got a major version of this, and this thing is getting better and better every day. So if you haven't checked it out, it's really awesome. I would encourage you to look at that for any Postgres needs that you have. Joins our large catalog of databases. I think databases are probably the largest one category that we have coverage for in the operator community. So that's really great. Check that one out if you haven't already. Next up is a new one, API Cast. I think I was looking into this. This is a part of the Red Hat 3-scale product and set of open source projects. I just want to flag it as something new. I haven't looked into it too closely, but I think it's an API management tool. Another one for the Crunchy operator. I flagged this one because they are properly using their channel. So they've moved one of their versions onto their stable channel. This is something that you can control through your cluster service version file and the other packages that are inside of your operator bundle. So I just want to encourage folks to think about their channel strategy. And here Crunchy has a few different channels so that they can manage what their customers are doing. And allow them to get newer versions of the operator on like a pre-release channel or something like that. This is something that Red Hat products are starting to do internally as well, and so I would encourage any folks to start investigating that if you haven't done it today. You should already have at least one channel because that's how the lifecycle manager works, but adding another is a benefit to you to get some feedback as well as your customers to get something that is a little more stable. All right, enough of PRs. Let's look at some real ones in Operator Hub that are live. So this is a new one to me. This is an IBM bucket operator. So this allows you to make CRDs or CRs for instances of storage buckets on IBM. Pretty cool. You can do encryption and things like that at the same time. So it's not just simple CRUD. So I thought that was pretty cool. Just wanted to call that one out. Another one is the IBM Cloud Operator. This is more than just buckets. It's doing bindings for the whole entire IBM Cloud catalog. If you want to check that out, all the different services they have on there, it does require an IBM Cloud account. This kind of follows with, I think that we've got the Amazon one, like I just mentioned, that we're going to change the new repo for that. We've got this IBM one. There is, I think, Microsoft has an Arc operator that's coming out. Which would be pretty cool. And I think there might be rumors of a Google one as well. So all your clouds are kind of covered for doing cloud-based management, but in Kubernetes CRDs, which is really cool. And the last one I have is this IBM CSI plugin. So we've got a number of other storage providers like Portworx and Storage OS, a few others. This joins another one. The reason I call this out is I love the plugin model of Kubernetes with CNI and CSI and CRI for storage networking and the container runtime. So I think operators make a great use case for managing those plugins and installing and configuring them correctly. So I just wanted to call that out that that we've got a bunch of them. Another one joins. So if you haven't looked at some of these, if you have storage needs or networking provider needs, there's probably an operator out there for you. So that was the main update I have on things going on in the community. Like I said, ton of great PRs, a lot of activity, a lot of folks updating operators and getting them out into your hands. So keep it up, and thank you for everybody that's adding these, reviewing them. It means a lot.
So if you go
that's all for me.
If you go to the home page for operatorhub.io, did we hit 100 yet?
Let's see. We are at 93.
93. So 7 more, and there's a few more days left in 2019. So, guys.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's get to. I think it's probably 100 if we get all those PR requests reviewed and acted. But I'm doubting we're going to get them all by Christmas as people drop off for holidays. So, thanks again, everybody, for all your efforts and this is pretty good. If there's any questions, throw them in the chat. And I don't see, is there someone from the SDK side of the house here? Can give an update from the operator SDK SIG. I know Joe Lanford said he would. I don't see Sean on the call.
I can give at least a brief update. I know that we're planning out the Helm 3 work. I know there's some PRs that have already been submitted, and that's being polished up. So that's pretty exciting as, the Helm 3 has been released for a little bit, and so now you'll be able to use that same technology, the tiller list install that we've kind of had for a while. Helm's now catching up. One thing to note is that I don't think there's any changes required to your charts, so you can use charts that were made a long time ago or have made just now. That those can be used by the Helm operator very easily. And the other thing I know, there's a ton of work going on and continues to be going on with the testing framework and the scorecard and other tests that we have. You can see that some of the scorecard stuff was mentioned in those PRs that I was showing. That's because it's being used to test out these operators. And so work is going underway on that. I know the big thing for 2020 is to add the ability for folks to provide their own tests into the scorecard. So when you bundle up your operator, including some tests that either the scorecard can use, your customers can use, any other platform that wants to use those to verify them can use, which should make the whole thing a whole lot safer and more resilient.
So Joseph Huizinga, I'm sure I'm killing the name, is asking if there's any update on the operator registry new packaging structure. And I think you can unmute yourself, Joseph, and do a follow-up.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
now I can.
Okay, great. Yeah, I guess I've seen some roadmap information that talks about, the Quay app registry going away and operators being, that metadata being packaged in Docker images and that sort of thing. So I was wondering if you could comment on, when we would start to see that kind of stuff, or, just for our own, how do we move forward kinds of things, if that's changing.
Yeah. So I believe that there was a comment on, I think it's been added to the PR or the thing. Are you using the nested directory structure yet? I think that's the first step of moving over to that format, which is, this is the link that's included in the PR. I just put it in the chat. So yes, you're going to see in the first quarter of next year, trying to get all the tooling aligned to, when you're bootstrapping a new operator and when you're bundling it into all the CLI commands as well as the scorecard and other things, understanding that new format so that we can move over to it. So yeah, that will remove any dependency on that Quay app registry, which is really nice. You're just using containers and moving them around as you would like. So this means that you can, store them in any OCI compliant registry, as well as do things like if you have an offline cluster or you want to build your own custom catalogs, this unlocks a much, much easier experience for that. And so that's what I think I'm really excited about, is using this bundle format unlocks the ability to do really simple dev and test of custom catalogs just between you and a cluster without any intermediary. So, you can just push that container somewhere and then have the cluster pull it down, understand it, and those operators are right on it without having to do anything with the app registry or building those more manual configurations. So that's the quick update off the top of my head. I think for the next SIG, we should get someone to do a proper overview of that. But any other questions on that right now? Otherwise, we'll maybe pick it up in January.
No, Rob, that sounds good. I guess, we're just trying to, understand too, if we're doing things the old way, is there some migration tooling or something, or they'll make that switch over kind of thing to build those Docker images easier?
Yeah, that is a great question that I'll have to defer to folks that are more in the know.
All right. Any other questions for Rob now that he's doing the updates for everybody today? Yeah, it's like, really? All right. The next thing I have a note on here is the draft governance and membership. And I'm just clicking through to go for the full details. I think we're at the point where all the comments have been in and we were just waiting for Sean to do something. I'm quite got to share my screen here. I'm wondering what the last bit is. I think I have to defer this until next year.
Yeah, I think it sounds like the governance all looks good for the most part. Gerard from the Kudo project was kind of pitching that Kudo become one of our official sub projects, which I think sounds great. This kind of picks up from the last meeting we had live from KubeCon, where he was there in person with some of his team, kind of talking about Kudo and those tools. So yeah, I think I just wanted to make sure he had a some sort of update before we ended 2019 here. But yeah, I think we'll pick that up in 2020.
All right. No, I'll do. I'll reach out to Sean and see if they've talked. But I know we're talking pretty closely with that. So that would be a good thing to pull in as a sub project and to help. They also have some great testing capabilities. So I want to definitely incorporate them into the community if we can. All right. So I'm going to go back to here. The next update is really another almost non-update. We've pretty much answered all of the questions except for one last one on the CNCF PR for proposing the operator framework for incubation consideration. I think there's one more question that needs answering on the thing, but there is a TOC meeting early. I think it's the first week of back in January. I'm going to see if we can try and get to a vote for the TOC on operator framework so we can move this forward. But that's pretty much just waiting for final approval or due diligence final say from the SIG app delivery SIG, so that we'll get a space on the TOC agenda again to call for a vote. That's moving forward slowly but surely. Any questions about that? Let me know and we'll try and answer those for you. But other than that, it is moving. It's just not as fast as I would like, but probably as fast as it's supposed to. Next up, I had a review and update on the Kubernetes client from Jeff McCormick. And he had also asked to have a discussion around the Java and Python clients. So Jeff, if you want to share your screen and talk a little bit about those two topics, that would be great.
Yep. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
So some of us were, this came up in the last call, and there was some questions and comments and some chatting going on about these particular clients, specifically Python and Java. So I just wanted to post this link out there to the quote officially supported Kubernetes client libraries and just point people to those. And these are supported by this Kubernetes SIG API machinery work group. And I looked a little bit at both of these, and there was some questions about whether they supported watches and stuff like that. And it appears to me, just first glance looking at these, that they both do. So I think some other libraries, client libraries were mentioned and stuff, but just wanted to share with this group that, these are supported client APIs that are, being promoted by this API machinery group, and this is the location where they're at. So if people want to dig in further to these to see, what do these support, I think this is a good starting point, though. And if there was going to be operator SDK, say, bindings or capabilities built so you could do a Python or Java controller, I just throw out there that these two client libraries look pretty good as a potential starting point if somebody wanted to go down that path. And I know probably a lot of people already knew about these. I think Sean, me and him talked about it. He knew about these. He thought the Java one might not support watches, but I think that's recently been added. So I just wanted to add this to the notes for this group as two very, I think, good candidates that people could maybe base operator SDK stuff on. And I posted the link out there to the chat session as well. So that's really all I had on this, but I did want to kind of point people to this, and maybe people could start poking on these and doing a little bit deeper investigation on them to see if these make really sense to build on top of. that's really all I had about that, Diane.
All right. Is that does that incorporate the other part of the topic that you were talking about? If those official Java Python clients are the ones that we should be using to build our SDK?
Well, I think that's the question. I know at KubeCon and other places, people have talked about the notion of building, an operator SDK capability with Python and Java. And, I think, first of all, you need these kind of client libraries. So I guess the question is that needs to be resolved, the next year time frame is, are these libraries the ones that you would use? Is this the starting point? So to me, they seem like really good starting points. Since these are both supported by the API machinery SIG, they seem to both support watches, but I think the group as a whole might need to do some, again, deeper dives on this. But to me, if you can decide, hey, these are the client API bindings or the client APIs to go with, kind of takes that off the table as a decision, and then you can start thinking about building something on top of these, or with these things. So I think that kind of decision needs to be made probably early sometime if people want to go down that path, But I think these are good starting points is what I'd say. Unless somebody can rule these out, I would start here maybe is my recommendation, but that's just my 2 cents.
Anyone else have another 2 cents on this, or should we start a thread on this perhaps on the Google group and see if there's any, because the attendance is a little low today. I'm thinking that maybe we could push that as a conversation on the Google group, and then when everyone comes back to the holidays, we can have a wider discussion about that if it doesn't get resolved on the mailing list. It seems like a good idea to me, always to use things like this, but that would be mine. Rob, I'm not sure if you have any 2 cents or thoughts on that.
Yeah, just that there's no need to recreate things if they already exist. Just need a vet, like you said, to make sure that they actually work. They have watches and all that stuff that we need to make it functional.
Okay.
I'll add maybe just another half cent, if I could, or you guys can decide what it's worth maybe after I'm done. Regardless of which clients, obviously, that get used here, the next step in a bigger picture is coming up with something that is filling the role of what controller runtime does in the Go world. And as complex as controller runtime can feel at times, it really does boil down to just a couple of rather simple high-level things, problem areas that it has to tackle, so that at the end of the day, whether you're in Go or Python or Java or anything else, we want people to be able to implement a reconcile function, spend most of their time there. So if there is interest in moving forward with, let's say, for example, Python and Java, it would probably be worthwhile to get all of those people together and do sort of a behavioral overview of what is controller runtime doing, what do we like about that particular library and the framework that it brings, and that would be a great jumping off point, I think, for figuring out how to create similar things in other languages so that we can have some kind of similar. And the experience obviously can be very tailored to each language and the idiosyncrasies of them, but some kind of similar thinking and philosophy about how to build controllers across the board.
All right. So before everybody keeps dropping off like flies, because it's the holidays, again, if there's any more to add to this conversation, let's start a thread, if you don't mind, Jeff, on the Google group and move this forward and see if we can come to a consensus.
Definitely. Sounds good.
All right. So we do have, there was an interesting thread on the Google group about the DoD's, the US DoD's use of operator registries, and Josiah Ritchie is on the call right now, and sort of impromptu because I don't think Alexander Froman from Capital One with his Dask operator showed up, unless he shouts out right now. So what I thought maybe Josiah, if you want to take a few minutes and explain what it is you're doing there with registries and operators, and give us a quick update.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for giving me the chance. So to give some background on all of it, the DoD has published a DevSecOps reference design that uses Kubernetes as their DevSecOps platform to move forward. And the Air Force has been pretty big involved in that. It's the United States Air Force, of course. And one of the things that they've developed as a part of this whole program is their DoD centralized artifact repository. And that's just Docker containers, essentially, that have been gone through all the requirements of the DoD. And that's publicly available out there. You can go find it and dig it up, and I can share links if someone's interested. But what they hadn't yet put together at this point is the same sort of thing specifically for operators. So I work for Salute, who's put together this SBIR contract proposal, and we've been awarded a phase 1 contract where we're bringing together what is basically taking what open source stuff exists and boiling it down into DoD approved operators so that those things can be moved forward into as a part of the DevSecOps reference design. So we're just getting started on what all that looks like exactly, but we had it publicly announced, and appreciate all the work that everybody else does that gives us a platform to do that kind of stuff. So I wanted to say, hey, thanks everybody. So I appreciate what you guys all do, and thanks for the chance to share.
Perfect. Well, keep us posted, and if at some future operator-related event or gathering you want to get up on stage and talk about it more, let me know, because there's lots of opportunity to share that. And so thanks.
Yeah, super cool.
Yeah,
very,
thank
very
you.
cool.
So thanks for that update. I'm just trying to look here. I had a few other people who had things, but I do not see them on the call. So Chris Short's not around today. He was going to give an update on Ansible stuff. I'm not quite sure what that was. And Alexander Froman from Capital One. There's also the proposal on the compostable integration in the SDK operator. I don't know if you want to cover that off today, Rob, or do you want to hold that for the next meeting?
Let's hold.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So, and I will just check in the chat if there's any other questions. If you could, if you haven't already, add your name to the attendee list. I put the link in there, and I'll try and do that. So the only other thing we have to do is pick a date in January for another meeting. So if we are the third Tuesday, that would be the 21st of January. If no one objects to that, I think by then everybody ought to be back from holidays, and that is pre going off to other places. So yeah, the next meeting will be January 21st, if all the stars align. So I'm going to let everybody have a half an hour back to their days. And
Hey, Diane,
yep.
it looks like there was one question Joseph had about offline and mirroring support for operators. We can talk about that really quick. Folks can drop off if that's not interesting to them.
Go for it.
Okay. So just to level set on the problem, so you have a bunch of operators. They all come from either open source provided community, and then they listed on Docker Hub or Koei.io or a Red Hat registry or some other Artifactory registry, whatever it is. So when we talk about disconnected or air-gapped clusters, basically, if you want to use those operators, you need to get both those images into your controlled network environment, as well as the specifications for how to run them. In this case, it's CSV, but if you were doing like an offline Helm chart, you would still need to get that chart plus the images that it uses into the cluster. So that's what we talk about with air gaps, mirroring, disconnected, whatever you want to call that whole thing. So the strategy that we're taking is for folks to include the images that their operators require inside of their CSV, such that if you have a tool like Scopio that copies container images around, it knows what container images to copy. In the world of OpenShift, we're doing this for the platform itself as well. So to do an offline install, you might need 40, 50 container images, depending on, what's going on. And you copy those into a registry, and then you rewrite all those references instead of being those public Quay or Artifactory or Docker Hub references to reference like registry.mycompany.com, which is accessible to your disconnected environment. And so the using the new packaging format that we were talking about, that is a container image, is really important for this because, once again, all you're doing is mirroring container images. Much easier than having to deal with any other format because, you can use any registry, you can set up your own. The question here was about the built-in internal OpenShift registry. You can use all of these. Doesn't matter what you can do as long as the environment can pull those container images. So we're going to see that as a new requirement if you want your operator to work in offline environments for different users, is to call out those images that you're using and then support, I think the path that we're going down is environment variables for folks to override those. So the idea would be that you're getting the same SHA, so you're getting the same image, just coming from a different host name. And so your operator needs to support, in air quotes, templating that in. It's really just reading an environment variable with a default address that would be your public, from Quay or Docker Hub or whatever reference to that image. Does that make sense? And then you've got your catalog that's built as a container, so you mirror that as well and then load that into the cluster.
Yeah, one of the questions, Rob, was there is also this custom resource, I can't remember, image policy thing that you can set up to define what these mirrors are.
Yes, the image content source policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess what I was wondering, we've been trying to go through this and verify how all this works and have been running into a few things maybe we don't understand. So, in general, we were thinking, that if this, I think the idea here is that if you had an operator that provisioned something that required an image that was referenced, say, in Quay.io, you wouldn't have to actually override that. That when you try to deploy that resource, that Quay.io would be overwritten because you set up this image policy that mapped it to something that was internal.
Yeah. So there's basically two ways to do this. The most correct way is rewriting those references when you build the catalog, just because it's going to be the most proper way. Kind of the fallback, or the easiest way to do this without modifying anything, is to use that image content source policy. Now, this is an OpenShift property where you can redirect where container images are coming from. So once again, like I mentioned, the SHAs are going to match. So you're getting the same container image, but at the container runtime level, you're saying, hey, when you used to go to Quay.io to get this, go to this other registry instead. And that's kind of at the runtime level. So you're basically doing like a live swap of the host name that it's using there. The one drawback to this is that it does require the container runtime or for the machine to be rebooted to fully pick up that change. I don't know enough about why cryo requires this, or like what's happening where the whole machine needs to be reset in order for that to happen. And so that is the one downside to that. But if you register all of these at one time, then you're only kind of updating once, and then you're good to go. Versus if you have the catalog that rewrites all these references, you're just doing it kind of the more proper way, so you don't have to do that image content source policy object. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that kind of, I think I need to just think through that, your first option there a little more. We were trying to do the other one, and this rebooting thing was kind of a non-starter for us if that's something that can't be toned down a bit, right?
Yeah, I totally understand you on that one. I'm trying to dig in myself and understand why that is a requirement. Yeah, it's definitely, you don't want to reboot, 500 machines to pull an image. So,
Yeah, because I mean, there's no way we could really get that policy set up correctly, up front. So
well,
So
so
for
this is
everybody,
where
I
in
just
the
want to mention
CSV.
I just want to mention I did open up an issue against the machine config operator for this exact thing. It sounds like there's some other things going on in the background that are going to try to limit the scope of what kind of machine configurations require reboot.
Oh, I got you. So it's more of like a safety, like, oh, we just do it for all config changes, and then we could maybe dial that.
I think so. I think they kind of rushed this out the door in 4.2, and so it could be they just have some goofing around to make it a little bit better. I hope. We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, this definitely has to do with machine config operator and really any config changes that it applies to a machine, regardless of how trivial. It gets back at a high level to the immutable infrastructure aspect of Red Hat CoreOS. And if I was a betting person, I would bet that they're actually creating a new OS tree layer on top of the existing OS tree, and that's why you have to reboot to switch into a new OS tree. But like Chris said, that's definitely a known pain point, especially as we're getting into bare metal deployments, where it can take a while for one of those pieces of hardware to reboot. That's a high priority to reduce the scope of how often these things need to reboot. But that being said, my last thing I'll add is that many of your cluster upgrades will involve rebooting your nodes, effectively one at a time as they get their OS updates applied. So yeah, I think it is fair to anticipate reboots on a regular cadence, and that they should be fully non-disruptive, and hopefully the primitives are in place, and between we and us, everybody can be using those primitives to ensure that their workloads are not disrupted as those reboots are happening.
Yeah, I think the problem with the rolling reboots is not that they're going to do any downtime, but it's like, oh, I want to install this operator. I don't want to wait for all of my machines to reboot, reinitialize their disks and all this stuff. I want to use it now,
Yeah, definitely.
One thing I was going to mention is, so this new addition to the CSV where you declare what objects or what operand images you're using, it means that you can mirror and create all of these objects at once. So you're not doing 500 rolling restarts or whatever. You would load the 500 objects in at once and then do one restart. So that's where, if you're doing an offline cluster, if you just load all of these in at once right at the beginning, then you don't have to disrupt anybody and all that kind of thing.
So Rob, I think I've seen that. When will that addition be there for the CSVs, where we can start adding that, the list of images and that kind of thing? Do you know?
So I think we're finalizing the guidelines and writing up some documentation on this right now, but I think it's basically done. The issue is going to be that every single operator author is going to need to go through and do that. Because some of these are templated directly in Go code, and that just needs to be manipulated a little bit, so it's in that CSV instead. So unfortunately, it's we're on the timeline of the entire community, but hopefully we'll hit the major ones, and the folks that are pretty popular and are now selling their operators are going to want to work in these disconnected environments. So hopefully it won't take too long. I don't really have an estimate there.
Okay. Have you guys ever looked at some kind of a mutating admission controller or webhook kind of thing to overlay these images as a way to rewrite them kind of thing?
That's effectively what the image content source policy is doing, just at the runtime level versus the Kubernetes layer. I think that if you wanted to do a POC of that, I think that would be kind of interesting to look at. I'm sure somebody on the Red Hat side has come up with why we went this route instead. But I know maybe this was already just a feature of the container runtime, and so we just went with it. But that would be an interesting thing to try as well. Yeah,
one of the things I just wanted to bring up is that the image content source policy is a cluster scoped resource, and all of the image repos inside OpenShift are all namespace scoped. So the problem is you have this cardinality problem, where you've got things that are referencing namespace registries inside this cluster scope resource. So then you're going to have this security problem where you're loading an operator one namespace, and he's going to have to access somebody else's namespace to get the image if they're loaded twice. So the advantage to having that mutating webhook option is you could actually have that looking at individual namespaces and have namespace policy.
I know at the platform layer, you need to have a registry that's outside the cluster, so you're not using the internal OpenShift registry because it needs to bootstrap the platform itself. So it's common for folks to have like a central Artifactory or Quay instance that, then they're running a number of clusters against. I think that is the envisioned thing for a disconnected install. I know the operators can be a little bit different because you could do that after the fact. So you could use that internal registry. But I think for the most part, we're seeing folks use external to the cluster registries.
So basically for air gap for workloads, you're recommending that they install their own registry and not use the internal one.
At least for the operators where you're, because the idea is you're probably not going to run one of these clusters, you're going to run several of them. And so by storing both the platform containers in one spot as well as the operator and operand containers in one spot, you're kind of vetting and copying them once, and then no one has to deal with it. And then you're just loading in custom catalogs or these image content source policies that point to that central registry.
So one related thing then is, so I work for IBM with Joe here. So we deal a lot with multiple architectures, and so fat manifest list, that kind of thing. And that having an external registry solves that problem because we know that the internal registry doesn't support that. But yet another issue is, and I lost my train of thought. Girl's reading my mind. Oh yeah,
digest
so transferring. Yeah, exactly. So you have to use a tool like Scopio or OC Pod or image mirror to be able to copy the images from registry to registry to preserve the manifest and the digest. Since it looks like that this image content source policy only supports digest redirection mirroring, doesn't support tags, and so one piece that has to be included in that somehow is sending the fat manifest across in addition to just the architecture-specific manifest. Has anybody thought about that at all?
I know folks have thought about this at a high level. I'm not tracking it closely enough to be able to speak to it. But I know that we do want to support different architectures in general across everything that we do, operators included. But I don't know if I can speak to that. One thing that I will add is I think if you're a certified operator, I know we have a verification pipeline that those go through. I think that was going to auto-convert any floating tags to their current SHA values at the time of the certification, and so that you can use this mirroring process correctly, and that would be where it would, append that SHA and replace the tag inside of your CSV.
Again, that only works for the operator. It would work for operands until all the rest of this feature spec was done, right?
Yeah, so that should work for any container that's kind of referenced in that CSV, I believe.
Yeah, okay. All right, that's helpful.
Yeah, these are all great questions. I'm trying to think of what the best way is to figure out your platform question. I guess you want to take that over to the mailing list, and we'll see if we can get the right folks involved.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm actually prototyping. Joe and I are actually prototyping this whole thing end to end. You may or may not have heard, we've actually had this little internal spec, which we're going to open source in the next few days here. It's called the case. Basically a packaging and distribution concept for heterogeneous workloads that, Helm charts, operators, whatever. And so we're going to develop some tooling that's going to allow you to make that air gap, saving, mirroring, loading, whole thing real simple. And because if you look at your documentation, because there's a lot of that data that's going to be in the CSV files, we want to be able to facilitate that mirroring much more easily. especially for heterogeneous kinds of things as we move towards OLM. So what I'll probably do is in the beginning of next year, I'm going to try to get this whole concept in front of you guys so we can kind of talk about it a little bit to see what kind of gaps we're finding. I think that might be useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chris, do you have a link to anything on the topic? Or
I am working on it right now. So this is something I've been working on all summer and fall for internally here, and I'm cleaning it up to remove all the IBM-isms out of there. So it's going to take me a couple of days. I've got to get repo ready to go. I just need to put all the stuff in there, and I'll start off a thread in the Google group for that.
all right. So perhaps start the thread and then let's add it like maybe an update or an overview or intro to it to one of the next SIG meetings, because that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. That's exactly where I want it to go.
Right. Any other things people have questions up for? All good conversations, folks. Really thank you for bringing up these topics and for attending today. Looks like there's one more chat. Chris, someone was asking what the name of that thing was that you were talking about. Have you named it?
Yeah, I'm going to put it in the thing here. It's called Container Application Software for Enterprises, CASE, C-A-S-E.
There you go. Another acronym.
Yes, and it's CASE, which overlaps with 50 other pieces of CASE, so you're welcome.
That's why we never let engineers brand anything, but always do. That's great. All right.
In a DoD IT environment, that will not be a problem.
So if your operator supports case, is it case sensitive?
He wrote it all in.
This is never going to go away.
All right, we got to get out of here.
I'm calling it for today, and please use the mailing list, and obviously have a great holiday break, and we'll talk to you again next year. And thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
See ya.